All right. According to this, I am live. Waiting to see. There we go. All right.
Oh, God, it doesn't say it on mine. Does that mean I'm dead?
I don't know. We'll count to 10 and we'll see if you show up.
Oh, my God.
All right. Yeah. Everything on my end makes it look like we are good. All right. We got someone already chatting. The channel retired. Yeah. Mark. Oh, I get 3 minutes of break. All right, Mark. Channel retired. Road to 500. Hey, I like it. All right, welcome to Virtual History 360. I'm Mr. Wade, and today is our newest installment of what I like to call your teacher's favorite history. You know, this is where I grab teachers from all over. Right now we're dealing with friends. I'll get to that in a second. But I grab teachers and I ask them to tell me what their favorite part of history is. This could be anything, could be big, could be small, could be the little details you've never heard of, and hopefully you guys find this interesting. And we've been live for a little bit now. Let's see if we can keep this going. Mark is, hey, Mr. Wade, hey, Mr. C. All right. Glad you made it. Glad for a little bit at least. Make sure you watch the end when you get home from work, okay? All right. So let's get started. We have a good friend of mine, Mr. Mike Clemens. Mike Clemens works at Osceola High School, but not for much longer. This is his last year, and I've known Mike for a long time, and you know, it's congratulations are due to him for his retirement because, man, I hope to make it that far. But in the time that I've known Mike, we've gone on, I don't know how many history trips together, some through grants, some just on our own, like Philadelphia a couple years ago. And as a side note, I realized as I was trying to come up with a thumbnail or, you know, preview picture, you and I don't have very many pictures together.
I don't think we do.
No, we got to work on that. We're going to have to go on some more trips if we can do a better job.
Yeah.
But just to do a brief introduction here, not a student, still love the channel. This channel is retired. You know, I appreciate that. You know, thank you for the love on the channel. You know, thank you for the support. Hey, Alyssa's on. She says, hi, Mike and Andy. Like visiting old friends. That's the truth, isn't it, Mike?
Yes, but I guess I'm the old friend. You guys are the younger friends.
I'll tell you, I'm not that far behind you, Mike. You know, don't let the face fool you here. Age is just a number, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, so finish the introduction. Known Mike for years. He's been a teacher, you know, in Osceola County, and my goodness, I've modeled my career after his, I like to say, because, you know, he is what you want as a history teacher. So I hope to live up to that. And I think I don't want to embarrass him too much, so I'll turn it over to you, Mike. The floor is yours.
Oh, you don't have to stop now, Andy. Go ahead. Keep going. Hi, everybody. I don't know who's on because I don't have a list. I can't see anybody that's on, but Alyssa, hope everything's well with you. Enjoyed yours last week. And I want to talk about one of my favorite pieces of history, and it has to do with spies and espionage and intelligence and counterintelligence and popularity contests and Mrs. Clemens just walked through the room covering her ears.
Just like my wife. She yeah. You can only tell so many history stories around the wife, right?
I know. Yeah, they get tired of them. So anyway, has to do with, of course, this man right here. I don't know whether you can see him or not. I hope you can. George Washington. It is 1777. And George Washington is not doing well as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, of the continental forces, of the soon-to-be United States of America. Not united yet officially. We have no Articles of Confederation yet. And, of course, the capital is still in lovely Philadelphia.
They've cleaned it up since then, I hear.
I'd heard that too. Yeah, especially after we left.
That was a good trip.
Yeah, it was a good trip. But anyway, Washington lost the city of New York. He lost the Battle of Long Island. Comes down to Philadelphia, determined to defend Philadelphia, the nation's. Well, I don't even think we could call it the nation because it's not truly a nation yet. We're working on it. They're working on it in the Continental Congress. And he loses Philly. He loses the Battle of Brandywine. He loses the Battle of Germantown. Things are not going well. He hunkers down in a place called Valley Forge. No battles were ever fought there. Valley Forge is simply what it sounds like. There was a forge, a big forge located there at one time in a valley. And Washington, of course, thought this would be a good place, far enough outside Philly. The Continental Congress skedaddled and went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They spent one night there, deciding that we could be a little further away. So let's go to the other side of the Susquehanna River to a thriving, almost Western city at that time called York, Pennsylvania. So, all the big players are still there, although we've lost some. There are a lot of the big name players are still there, though. And they meet in York, Pennsylvania. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is that in York, I'm looking for a picture here. Does everybody know what urban renewal was?
Well, I think a lot of people that watch this channel are probably young enough to be on the back end of urban renewal.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe we should explain that for them.
All right. In the 1950s, the centers of the cities were dying in America. Everyone had moved out. The middle class was moving to the suburbs. Washington had spent Eisenhower had spent millions of dollars building roads and making the cities and the suburbs very accessible. Rail transportation was tremendous in a lot of cities. And the rich people had moved even further out from the center of the city. So the only people that were left in the center city were the factory workers, the poor people. Cities began to deteriorate, and the government said, well, if we could take these down, if we could build inner city housing projects for people, so we'll tear down all these old buildings. Well, they start tearing them down in York, Pennsylvania, and they're tearing down the facades on the front of these two buildings on a corner in York, and somebody says, stop. And this is what they eventually find underneath the buildings.
Wow. The fact that it was covered. Yeah, just forgotten about for 200 years.
Yeah. The one on this side here is called the Golden Plough Tavern. And this is called the Gates House.
Can you hold it up just a little bit higher, Mike?
Yeah, that better? Golden Plough Tavern over here, and the Gates House over here.
So, Mike, I'm going to stop you before you move too far ahead. Yeah. Why are the windows on the tavern so low?
Wait, gee, amazing you would ask that, Andy.
It's not like we prepared for this.
No, right? It's not like you set me up here. It's really kind of interesting. The first time I went in the Golden Plough Tavern, you go down to get into it, and it's down 3 or 4 steps. And I thought, oh, this is odd. They put the tavern in the basement, as you and I had talked about, but they really did not. If you look out on the corner of on this side street over here, there's a side street right here. There's windows on the bottom, barely showing above the sidewalk. And I looked out the window, and of course you could see the sidewalk covering half the window or more. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And the curator of the Golden Plough Tavern came in and said, well, there's a reason for that. Over the years, they have built the roads up so much. This building was originally on ground level, and the original road was on ground level. But now the sidewalks and the roads cover about half the front of the house. So
just year after
yeah,
year after year,
yep,
just
another layer
wow.
and another layer. Yep. And the house next to it is interesting too, because that was when they started taking it apart. They noticed there were big timbers on it, and it was kind of a German half timbered look. And they thought, my gosh, we should stop and call somebody. So they did, and they eventually called an architect in, a historical architect, and he said, "You can't tear this down. This is at least Revolutionary War era buildings." So they didn't, and now that forms part of York's historical district. So let's go back to our friend George Washington, who is hunkered down in Valley Forge, lower than Whale Poop because they can't beat the British. And
You know, he
yeah.
might not be feeling too good, but we mentioned, I brought up our trip to Philadelphia a second ago. One of the coolest parts of that trip, and I think you'll agree with me, is when we went into the Museum of the American Revolution and they actually had his tent on display.
Yeah.
His office was probably about the size of my house, and that was his traveling tent. So, he probably wasn't feeling too good, but that tent that he traveled around with, yeah, he was still living all right.
Yeah. And as I said, when I was a kid, that tent used to be set up at Valley Forge, and it was just in a glass enclosure, and that was all. And at times, they actually took it out and took it outside and set it up. And I'm just amazed that it lasted as long as it did. But
the pain in the conservator's voice when she told that story, or when you told that story to her.
Oh yeah, exactly. It was amazing. But we used to do a lot of scouting. They have a winter scouting jamboree at Valley Forge, and I've actually don't ask me why, but I've slept in the snow out there camping out when I was with Boy Scouts. But
you got the full experience.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So anyway, let's get to the plot.
Sure.
We have a man named General Horatio Gates, former British officer, now working for the American Army, and he has the only victory, the only large victory so far at the Battle of Saratoga. Although he never saw much of the battle because he was a firm believer in commanding from behind.
Mm-hmm. The British style.
Yes. So he stayed back from the battle. And of course, it was up to Benedict Arnold to go out and save the day. And they end up capturing 8,000 British soldiers. And it's a decisive defeat and ruins the plan to split New England off from the colonies. So Gates is championed as a hero. And he petitions to get a raise in rank because he thinks he deserves it. And he hops over several people who are lower than him and gets this increase in rank. And then there's a lot of talk going around about perhaps it's time to look at a new commander. And General Gates would definitely be the commander that we should look at. Well, one of his biggest supporters, here's Gates, just to show you what Gates looked like.
Very formal. Seems
yeah.
like he's seen.
Yeah, he looks British. So, enters a Frenchman or an Englishman via France who comes to Washington, presents papers, and said, I wish to serve you. Washington didn't like the guy very much. His name was Thomas Conway. Looked for other pictures, but couldn't find a lot of good pictures of old Thomas.
That's really the only one I found. Yeah, there's not much.
So this is Thomas. So he says, why don't you go to York and see if they can't. Washington writes a letter and says, why don't they create a war board to help procure things for the army? This would take a lot of pressure off of him of having to, be in charge of the army, train the men, plan the battles, and procure supplies for everybody also. By this time, and we talked about this, so let's see if we can't give this away. This becomes a very important building in American history. Most of you have never seen this building.
Well, it's not made of marble. It's not white. Doesn't have a big dome.
No, it doesn't. It does have a cupola up top. This is America's first Capitol. Because if we look at this, can you see it, Ari?
Looks good on my end. I'll stop talking so it goes big again. Think you need to say something, Mike, to get the screen to switch back to you.
Okay. I'll just hold it to let people see what's going on. But what has happened and what has transpired is in the fall of '77, the Articles of Confederation are passed, uniting the 13 colonies and establish the government of the newly created United States of America. And of course, they remain in effect till 1789, when they're replaced by the Constitution. When people ask where was the first capital, a lot of people say Philadelphia, a lot of people say New York, some people say Washington, D.C., but indeed, this was the first capital of the United States under the newly created Articles of Confederation. So all the big players are there. And a lot of it, yeah, I'm about ready to do that too. A lot of it takes place at these two buildings, the Golden Plough Tavern and the Conway House. And here's what transpires. Gates, excuse me, I said Conway House, Gates House. Gates is living, he has rented the house next to the tavern. It's interesting because it's very small. The picture is kind of deceptive, but the house is very small. Upstairs, there are two very small bedrooms. Unless you're going to have a dinner, then you take the wall and you unhook it at the floor and it's on hinges and you lift it up and it hangs from the ceiling above everyone. And now you have a large room where you can have a banquet hall.
Really?
Yep.
That's actually pretty cool.
It was. I remember the first time I saw it, I said, oh my gosh, that's so clever. And this is where a lot of the intrigue and the subterfuge take place. Gates, our friend Gates, let me go back to his picture so you keep these guys straight. Our friend Horatio Gates is now being supported by a new member of the War Board who Washington sent, Thomas Conway. And Conway begins a prolific letter writing campaign. And he eventually writes to Gates and says, you rightfully should be leader of the army. And we should get on with it. Well, one of Gates' men, you remember the old World War II saying, loose lips sink ships?
Yes.
Well, one of Gates' men got a little bit too much wine in him and happened to mention it to someone. And this someone relayed the message to Washington, and Washington heard about it. And of course, Washington was not going to allow this to happen. The words, let him retire in peace to Virginia. were being tossed about.
Yeah, I remember. I want to
but-
jump in real quick because I found this super interesting because the thing that I think set him off the most was being called a weak general. They're mudslinging, right? And I think of the tie-in, because I've talked about it a bunch on this channel, Hamilton the musical. One of the lyrics in the song is Charles Lee, Thomas Conway, obviously the guy we're talking about today, Thomas Conway, they take your name and they drag you through the mud. And Washington's retort in the musical is, I can take it. My name's been through a lot. But actually reading about Washington's reaction to all this, he wasn't very happy, and he
wasn't.
I don't want to say oversensitive, but it definitely irked him, and it really riled him up a little bit. He didn't just brush it off; it's something that got to him.
Yeah. There's actually a couple names in here that really surprised me. The first one was one of the Lee boys from Virginia came out in support of Gates. Which really surprised me, a fellow Virginian. That was interesting. And the man who was called America's first doctor, Dr. Benjamin Rush, was a big supporter of Gates and truly disliked Washington as commander-in-chief. Thought he was just a loser. So Washington sends his favorite son to York. And his favorite son attends a dinner. Oops, wrong house. At the Gates home on the second floor with the wall now on the ceiling. And they're talking about all the men who are so important to the Revolutionary War cause. And Lafayette stands up and says, but you're forgetting the most important man of all. I pledge my allegiance and toast our commanding general, George Washington. And you could just see the air go out of the room because nobody was going to go against Lafayette, because they knew if they did, he would take his toys and go back to France, and France would not be involved at all. So Lafayette, even though he, I think he knew what he was doing, and probably had been coached a little bit or whatever, but saw the great opportunity to do this. And I was going to show you. Here's our friend Lafayette. Now remember, Lafayette is only 19, 20 at this time, a young man, but so knowledgeable and so well-spoken, and so I'm going to show you the sign that used to. They have since changed the sign, and I'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to read it first, and then I'll show it to you. It was here in 1778 at a banquet in the temporary home of General Gates that General Lafayette proposed as a mortal toast to the commander-in-chief its declaration of loyalty thwarted the Conway Cabal, a scheme to displace General Washington in favor of General Gates. And this sign was placed in 1932 by the York Historical Society, Yorktown chapter of the American Revolution, Daughters of the American Revolution. And
So they changed it since then?
Yeah, they have changed it since then, because what has happened is different interpretations of history. We now look at this. This has been, at the time that sign was put up, it was a big deal. I mean, here Lafayette, the perfect story. Lafayette saves his beloved Washington, and Washington goes on to win the war and fight the mighty fight and become the father of our country. But now people look at it and they say, well, it was just a minor plot. It was never that well organized. And I just don't see it. I think there was I think at that time that meant a lot. And if there were all these people, Benjamin Rush, who is such a well-known name in Philadelphia, and Conway, and there's a great story about Conway. Conway wouldn't shut his mouth after this happened. So one of Washington's generals challenged him to a duel on July 4th, and he shot him through the mouth, and it came out the side of his head, the bullet. And he said, well, at least I have silenced that wagging tongue. And I thought, they just don't make history like this anymore.
It's funny, reading about, he thought he was going to die, so he actually sent an apology letter to Washington. Yep,
he did.
And then he survives, and he's like, uh-oh. So he goes off into exile, and yeah,
he goes back to France. Yeah. But that's my story of the Conway Cabal, and I just love the story because it's, to me, that's history. So,
yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I want to add something to what you said. I agree with you that it really was a turning point. There were more names that were against Washington than just those that were actually plotting. John Adams, first VP, John Adams, pretty big name. He was on record saying, he was not a fan of Washington's Fabian tactics, referring to Fabius, who defeated Hannibal in the Punic Wars. Well, obviously, historically speaking, it worked out, using those tactics, so a little foreshadowing there. You should know that it was going to work, but people doubted him, and having that doubt, just on your back the whole time. And I just kind of want to jump real quick. I have a couple of comments here. Alyssa, Lafayette's one of her favorite characters. I can understand that. He's a pretty awesome dude. Yeah. Love Lafayette and Washington's relationship. Fun fact, Lafayette names his son George Washington. Did you know that, Mike?
I did know something about that. I had heard it once or twice. I never looked it up, but I had heard it before.
I guess it's better than having a feral tomcat named after you. That's for you, Alyssa, since we're talking about Hamilton.
That's great. But they just don't make. To me, that's interesting. And to me, it's, I would love nothing better than to find some letter written somewhere by someone that substantiates all this. And, damn it, we were going to go through with the plot, and that turncoat Lafayette.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I agree that you say history doesn't, happen like this, because think about this. What really set off Washington to, really put the kibosh on this? He was called weak. Men fought duels by being called weak. If you go on Twitter and just do an advanced search, you can search. Do you know how many, I couldn't even find a total number. How many people have commented the word weak on Twitter just in the past 48 hours? Thousands. I couldn't get to the bottom of the list. Wow. So the fact that, we live in an age where words don't evoke the same reaction, but at the same time still upset people. I don't know. How do you strike that balance of, what is historical and what is people just running their mouths? I don't know.
I don't, to me, it doesn't negate the fact that I think Washington at times was a really good showman. The story of him where the army was mutinying that winter, and he goes out and he's reading, and he takes, no one had seen him with glasses on, none of his men. And he says, my eyesight has grown weak in the service of my country. And I bet there wasn't a dry eye in the house when he put his glasses on and read that letter to the mutineering troops, and stopped the mutiny. But I think he knew what he was doing, and but hey, a good commander knows that.
He could see the big picture, when a lot of people couldn't. And
so, but that's all I've got. But I just think it's such a great story.
Oh, I agree, and I appreciate you giving up your evening, 7:30, to spend the time talking to me. And like I told Alyssa, who's watching now, the invitation stands. If there's any topic you want to bring up, you tell me, and I'll make time to have you on the air again, because I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, Mike. I appreciate the people chatting with us. I've been trying to keep up with it. Type back to people as they come in, and if they're watching, just to see if there's any questions I can answer. I probably should have said this at the beginning. By all means, if you're watching this, hopefully live, but if not, on replay, if you see something that strikes a nerve and you want to ask a question, ask it. I'll answer it. If you're watching this on replay, just ask it in the comments. I'll get back to you. Maybe it'll be a topic of a future episode. Maybe we'll find someone else to talk about this. But I think this went very well, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on.
Great, Andy. Don't forget Phineas Davis.
Phineas Davis is on my list to read tonight. So
okay, all right. I hope you can find something.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I hope you can find something on him. All right.
I'll send you a message when I do.
Okay.
All right. So let's go ahead and sign off. I just want to say thank you to you, Mr. Clemens. Thank you to those of you watching, and don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, and Mike, I'll let you say the final goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoyed it. I love nothing more than talking about good history. So have a good evening. Be safe.